Welcome to the Power Panel podcast, a show where we follow the leadership journeys of exceptional African women at the helm of public service and civil society. Our question is, how do African women lead and deploy power? I am your host, Ambassador Rachel Omamo, a senior counsel, diplomat and former cabinet minister in Kenya. We are in Harare, Zimbabwe in 1999, at the close of a conference attended by some of the country's most influential women leaders.
I extend our heartfelt gratitude to everyone who contributed to the success of this conference.
The air is abuzz with animated discussions about women's rights and the clamor for constitutional reforms. In this gathering is a young, determined woman in her 20s. She has a mission in mind. She courageously approaches a distinguished and acclaimed woman leader who will later become her mentor. She quickly introduces herself.
And I said to her, I want to learn from you. I'm willing to come to your house and babysit your children. I'm willing to come and cook if you say it's cooking, if you say it's cleaning. If you say come to my office, come and type a document, whatever you say, I'll come and do it. But I want to be in your sphere so that I can observe, I can absorb, I can learn, and you can see how I grow, and then you can help me shape myself so that I can, become really like you, is what I wanted to be. And I got that privilege.
This daring young woman was Janah Ncube, now the Global Executive Director of Crisis Action. She is a women's rights crusader, governance specialist, and policy advisor. Janah's story is one of self-motivation, an unrelenting drive for excellence, and a clear agenda to link her leadership to the battle against injustice, poverty, and conflict in Africa and across our world. We start her journey in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe in the 1970s.
I always say, when I think of my sense of self and everything that then has informed who I have become and what I do, stems from growing up as an ordinary girl in an ordinary neighborhood, in an ordinary city in a corner of the world in Zimbabwe. And I was born to working class parents. My mom used to work in a factory, making suitcases and leather goods. And my father used to work in what, in our context in Zimbabwe, we call a beer garden, where people would go and, after work, sort of a bar, but for ordinary people in high density areas. So really ordinary parents who, though, did a lot for their families. So I grew up in a context of poverty. Although I can never say we were really poor, but I grew up in a context of poverty where I saw what poverty does to people and how it pushes them to extreme levels of desperateness and despair and a sense of helplessness, and grew up hating poverty. And also grew up with a sense of injustice as a girl, seeing how we were raised in a very differentiated way with my siblings. I grew up in a household where there were like 16 children. So there was just this differentiated sense of this is what girls do and this is what boys do. And as a girl, you had all of the household chores. You were responsible for a lot more things. And really felt like it was unfair. And that has literally informed my career path, my activism, And so really are fighting for a world that doesn't have poverty and that is just and fair for everybody, regardless whether they are a girl or a boy.
Were you angry as a child, Janah?
I was a very angry child, oh my goodness. A lot of my leadership actually is informed by anger because of the sense of injustice, right? Activism came out of just the anger of wanting to fight, prove the world wrong about that. As a girl, I cannot reach that, I can't do that, I can't be good in math, I cannot lead people, I cannot lead men, I cannot reach high echelons of power. I think it's actually remained an interesting fuel, and I have had to accept to embrace it as one of the fuels that motivates and informs and sustains my engagement with issues of injustice that exist in the world around us.
How did Janah marshal that anger, that fire in her, into a positive accelerator for her leadership path?
I guess now we can look back and start, ascribing descriptors like positive and so forth and so on. By the time you're just getting on with it, I mean, I think initially I will say it was really used to channel I'm going to be good on my education and I'm going to get out of here. So a sense of I want to break free. So I had no time or energy for other things other than doing well at school because, Zimbabweans really, we got, I guess, as a legacy of Mugabe, who was a teacher and an educator. Education for us has been a very key component and a big mark for a lot of Zimbabweans. We are one of the most highly educated communities on this continent. And my parents had put up a Kalie placard in our sitting room that I still believe in a way that was written, education is the key of life. So I channeled my anger to that. But as I also grew, I channeled my energy to really wanting to make the world a more just world. So even in high school, I was in different clubs. I was in the debate club and leading at it. I was a junior counselor at the Bulawayo City Council. They did a program for students to become, junior counselors, junior mayors. I was in there and doing a lot of positive things.
Janah is clearly an energetic and bright student with dreams of going to university. However, she finds herself entering the job market early as an accountant, soon after completing her high school education.
I don't think I necessarily chose it. I think it was the best opportunity I got following my O levels. That's where I did really well. I got a string of B's. It's so painful to say that for me because I was an A student, but I got a string of B's out of my O levels, and I was really good at accounting as well. And I'd done some professional certificates in the year I was writing my Cambridge O levels. So when I finished my A levels and didn't do as well as I thought I had, I now needed to get a job, and I had these professional certificates that I already had that opened up opportunities for me to work as an accountant. So I was jobbing based on what I now had a bit of professional competence to do. Did it well, I guess, but I guess I discovered my passions as I was doing that.
Janah is pragmatic. She leverages and makes use of the valuable qualifications she has in hand.
I'm a firm believer of a saying that I really talk a lot about. You do what you gotta do so that you can do what you want to do. So that's something that I've really always believed in and obviously lived through at that time. I was in a place where I had no ability to go back to school or to go to university, private universities, because the competition for public university places was really, really high, where you could get government grants with the results I had for my A level. So I really had to get a job. I didn't have any other option. So yes, using that which I had at that moment and doing the best that I could with the opportunities that I really got. In a way, that's something that also really shapes your work ethic. For me, I feel that every opportunity I've then ever gotten in my career has always felt like something that's most precious, that I uphold with a high value, and I thoroughly apply myself so that I can be the best that I can be in that role at that time, whatever work is before me. That's an attitude and an approach that I've then carried since that time. And so that's something I would really encourage young people today, to take every opportunity that comes your way. And you don't always find the thing you want to do at the beginning of your career. And honestly, for most young people, you really don't even really fully know what exactly you want to do or where exactly you want to end up. You start off thinking you want something, but could be surprised by what life brings to you, or the many other opportunities you learn you didn't even know existed prior to embarking on your career.
As her career progresses, young Janah is drawn to the political and social issues of the day, particularly social justice and the agitation for constitutional reform in Zimbabwe.
Going into the workspace, of course, when you come also from a context of poverty and earning an income, kind of gives you opportunities and freedoms, but also exposure to many other things that you might not have been aware of from the small world that you operated in. While I loved and I think did a really fairly good job in my work as an accountant, I think I started off with Zambuko Trust in the mid-90s and ended up with Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe as their finance manager in the late 90s into 2000s, where I worked actually as a consultant. I think the season when I was with the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe, where yes, I was working with church leaders in Zimbabwe to seek supporting people who were facing humanitarian situations, you then started seeing the need for a change in transformation in policies or in the way as a people were being governed. And that also coincided with a specific opportunity in the country where civil society was organizing itself to agitate around a new constitution. And different actors were finding voice to make a case for this new constitution, which I think our rationale was important to rebuild and reimagine Zimbabwe as Zimbabweans, because of course the constitution we had was one that had been negotiated at independence and negotiated with the British. And so a sense of ownership didn't exist for us at that time. I really was captivated by the agenda for changing this constitution. And it was a struggle that we eventually succeeded to get a new constitution in Zimbabwe in 2013.
Janah transforms herself into an activist.
So I got involved with our work for a new constitution in Zimbabwe in 1999, I would say. When I was 25 years old, we had a big economic shake-up in the country in 1997, where we actually still say there's a November Black Friday when our currency which in the early 90s was still $1 is to 10, 11, 12 Zimbabwean dollars. But we saw our politicians under the leadership of President Robert Mugabe make decisions that literally shook up our economy, and that showed the cracks in our governance model. And because I was so passionate, I was an activist by night. And I always say being an accountant was my day job, and being an activist and a change maker became the thing that I did after I knocked off at work. So that's how I started doing my activist work as part of a coalition called the National Constitutional Assembly. And through it, learned to articulate things as I saw them. And through that participation, learned to start writing about the issues that were affecting me as a young person, me as a woman, and me as a Zimbabwean. And so, yeah, I think I learned to tell the story of me and connecting it with the story of us as Zimbabweans and connecting it with the story of now, why that agenda was important to take forward at that time. So the transformation actually happened as I was doing a day job, but also doing this other work parallel to that. That was a lot more political. That was very much about mobilizing and engaging the public. Eventually, I actually started getting job opportunities down that path.
Ardent about social change and eager not only to immerse herself fully into the push for constitutional reform, but to also expand her horizons, Janah leaves Bulawayo for Harare. There she meets an exceptional woman leader who becomes her mentor and guide.
I was one of those people who was thoroughly blessed to be mentored by some of the best brains in this country at that time and evermore, I will argue. And some of the most passionate and most fierce fighters for what is right and good and just for Zimbabwe. And so I got exposed to those people, and I was really taken in. I will always celebrate Togomache. At that time was the leader of the National Constitutional Assembly of Zimbabwe, and was a woman leader, was, really passionate and fierce voice for women's rights. I first saw her on television. It was news time, and at our house, it was a religion to watch news every day. And this woman called Togomache was speaking on TV and was actually at that time the chairperson of the Women's Coalition, which I ended up being the chairperson of later, and was speaking about the role of women participating in the affairs of Zimbabwe. I had in my life never seen a woman speak so powerfully, so fiercely, so boldly, so assuredly, so articulately. I just could not believe a woman like her existed, and I could not get over it. And a few months later, I was now in the same city with her, Harare. I looked for her. Eventually, I met her at a public meeting where she was speaking. I made sure I attended, and she spoke obviously powerfully. And afterwards, I went over to her and introduced myself and said to her, "This is who I am. I want to learn from you. I will do anything you ask me to do. Just allow me to be in the same space with you to learn from you."
You were that direct?
I just had to. I had never seen anything like that. She inspired me so much. And it felt like, when you can see something that you think, wow, is it possible that I could be this and do this? I love what she's doing. How is she doing it? I literally walked up to her after the meeting. It was incredible.
The exceptional Madame Togomache takes Janah under her wing, providing her with exposure and guidance.
And of course, she thought, who is this person? Where is she coming from? For us at that time, there was a whole notorious perception and situation of where people felt, oh, they are spies and, there are people who want to sabotage some of the initiatives the civil society were doing. But then I think she spoke to some people who actually knew me and my work, and she allowed me to go under her wings, and she would call me to her office and say, okay, can you help with this? And I think she did that so that she could also see what I could do. And with time, she started trusting me with other bigger responsibilities, delegating, say, okay, Janah, can you draft a speech for me? I'm being asked to go and do this. And then it got to a time where she'd be like, I've been asked to go and do this, but I can't do it. Can you go on my behalf? Or sometimes she'd be like, I'm going to this interesting meeting. Come along. I think you will enjoy. So she opened doors for me. But what I also say, though, if you get mentored like I did, your mentor can only facilitate opportunities for you sometimes, but she opened doors for me. It was up to me how I performed in the room. It was not up to her. It was up to me to show my capability, prove my being deserving to be in the room that she will have enabled me to access. So a mentor is critical. I think they can be a great accelerator. I think they are great to give you feedback. I think if you allow yourself and open up yourself to be given feedback, they really can be a great support system for you, as you grow into what you want to be. So I strongly advocate mentorship.
Janah blossoms. She unlocks her talents and begins to see herself differently. Importantly, she discovers the power of her voice.
I think it became a season of discovery of my skills, competencies, gifts, and talents. And it's really important to have mentors in your life, I believe, because even when you then doubt yourself, as you say, what, you're 25, you see yourself as a nobody. But when you have somebody looking at you and saying, I think you've got something, I think you've got a message, I think you can actually do something and it inspire other people, that also adds courage and lights a different type of fire and light in you. And that definitely happened for me. But of course, I also, to be quite honest with you, chose to apply my skills and disciplines. As an avid reader, I became an avid reader. I became an avid researcher. And I really, believed in the message and the views and perspectives that I thought, let me use different platforms to articulate them. So, of course, I would participate in platforms, and eventually I started being asked to be a speaker in meetings, in workshops, in conferences, in rallies. I went around the country in Zimbabwe to, educate people about the value of a constitution and why the constitution is an important instrument. And so, yeah, I guess in the process, your profile, people get to know about the work that you do.
At our first signpost, Janah teaches us to be proactive and bold as we traverse our leadership paths. Value what you have, seek out mentors, and push yourself beyond your limits. As Janah develops her advocacy skills, she also becomes an opinion shaper.
Yes, part of my journey into civil society and therefore a leader, I think, in the causes and the struggles of Zimbabwean people, I had a column in a daily newspaper, the Daily News. I got the column at 26. And so got asked to to be a contributing columnist to a prominent daily newspaper, being asked to go and speak on international platforms around the world about the cause of Zimbabwe and why we were agitating for what we're agitating for. It was a lot of work, passion, but yeah, also quite a lot of people who handheld and acknowledged what was in me.
Thought leadership is not an easy task, more so for a young woman in her 20s. Janah explains her motivations.
I think if you have ever been aggravated by something in life that makes you so angry or that sparks you up and makes you feel alive, sometimes there's a natural extension in how you express either that anger, that frustration, or that joy and excitement and zeal towards it. I found a cause in the journey also that helped me find me. Because in a way, you then realize that a lot of the things that you felt, so it really became a story about myself. The things that limited me and that I felt denied to me, that you then realize that were not necessarily personal, were not just because of your family or your community, but that they were structural. There was a system that had been designed to keep you where you were kept and to choreograph your life the way you were, be it for us colonialism, imperialism, and for me as a female patriarchy. So all these then became terrains of struggle, and you begin to have language, you begin to, in a way, have new lenses that help you see and understand your life, but then the life of the community that you come from and the peoples who look like you, in my case, female, black, and young, and all of that. So finding me and finding my story and finding my voice helped me tell not only my story, but the story of those who are like me or those who are like where I come from. So the whole thing around, as I said, the story of me and the story of us. So making my story connect with the audiences that I engaged with, but also the story of now, why it was imperative at that time for us to make these changes. So I honestly, I think the writing, the speaking are disciplines that, of course, you acquire and improve over time and with experience. And I found a lot of that. You get feedback from people on that so that, you are continuously improving and so on.
Janah encounters hurdles as she projects her voice and her ideas within Zimbabwean society, but she remains steadfast.
What I also found was it was not just about being bold, but being courageous, because you're putting your thoughts out in the public and you're beginning to say what I have to say matters, and you have to give it time and attention and read it. Why would people want to read from me? Who are you? And so forth and so on. But you're saying I matter. And if I matter, you matter. If my voice matters, your voice also matters. So participate in these processes, speak out, engage, make your input. I think those really were the key messages that we're putting out. And part of it also was a lot of discipline, Ambassador, because, sometimes it's very easy to get a lot of critique, and I got lots of it. Being female, being young, people thought typically she slept her way through to all the opportunities she has, which I hadn't done. It was really shocking in my world to get those kind of attacks from other people that I actually had admired and felt like I was following in their paths. But yeah, I stayed with it. So you have to have courage to face all that feedback and still say, but this is bigger than me. This cause matters. For me, the cause mattered more than my ego. The cause mattered more than my feelings.
As we take this short power break, we ask that you subscribe to the Power Panel podcast. Let's work together to expand the Power Panel community. Visit our website, birdsongafrica.com, and follow us on social media to plug into the Power Panel network. Email your thoughts to hello@birdsongafrica.com. When we return, we unveil the next stage of this journey. This is the Power Panel podcast. Through the force of her determination and hard work, Janah becomes an integral part of the women's movement and an active player in the clamor for constitutional reform in her mid-20s. Janah assumes the leadership of two important and influential organizations and becomes the executive director of the Women in Politics Support Unit, WIPS, and the chairperson of the Women's Coalition of Zimbabwe, following in the footsteps of her mentor.
Oh my goodness, I was, when I became executive director of WIPS in 2002, I was 26. I was the youngest CEO of a national organization at that time. It's incredible. Yeah. So I got, based on an invitation by the board, to become the executive director of that organization. It was young, it was new, and Togo actually founded it. And at that moment, there was just a sense that it required somebody who could incubate the vision of the organization and take it forward. As chairperson of Women's Coalition, I was elected into the role by the CEOs of other organizations. So I was asked to run as the chair, and I did. I was 27.
Young Janah was accessing influential opportunities in Zimbabwe's civil society and leading women that were generally better educated and experienced than her. She had not yet obtained a university degree or other academic qualification related to women's rights and democracy.
I started working and getting really big roles without what I had thought you needed, which was a degree at that time. And so I really felt very privileged, even if I also felt like, I suffered from an imposter syndrome. Because I would feel like, oh my goodness, I'm always around people with degrees, with PhDs, with masters, and me, I don't even have any of that. But nonetheless, that also drove me to really apply myself so that I could never be found wanting or ever be pointed out as the one who is unable because I didn't have this qualification. And that has stayed with me. And that's still the way I work up to today, even if I now, of course, have all these qualifications and accolades through the work that I do.
Janah has an extraordinary work ethic.
Absolutely. I've always thrown myself at everything with absolute passion. I fully engage. I uphold the value of excellence. Like I said, doing whatever I do extremely well. So it's not so much about working hard, even though I do work hard, but it's really about being very results oriented. I've always been impact driven, and so really dedicate myself in the processes of what I do so that I get an excellent result and an excellent outcome. I was actually the executive director of Women in Politics Support Unit, which was the organization that provided technical support and policy and political advice to women members of parliament and women ministers from 2002 to 2004. And I must say, up to today, they still talk about the era when I was the leader of that organization. And at the same time, I was the chairperson of the Women's Coalition of Zimbabwe, which brought together women's organizations and the CEOs of the women's organizations at that time. And yes, I didn't have a degree. I got those appointments. I got lots of recognitions, including a scholarship, was competing with other people with even more qualifications than I had on the basis of the achievements that I was able to attain in that time.
As the public profiles of young emergent women leaders rise, they can succumb to the vicissitudes of fame and egoism. How did Janah find grounding and equilibrium?
I think for me, maybe grounding I would attribute it to three components. Growing up as a truly African child raised in our African values, I'm sad that I think we live in a world where now a lot more African children or young people are growing up and wanting to embrace a lot more of Western values and discard our own ways as African people. And I'm a feminist, so I'm not saying embrace everything, even things that are harmful to you. But I feel Ubuntu is a gift that Africa is still yet to shine to itself into the world. So that whole concept of humanness, of humility, of valuing other people and seeing other people and honoring other people, honoring your elders and so forth and so on. So I think those values that were ingrained in my upbringing of Ubuntu are really, up to today, remain a core for grounding me and how I then appropriate myself. The second thing for me, Ambassador, was choosing to have a relationship with God. I'm a firm believer in God. I'm a Christian. And that for me grounds me because I make choices and decisions on the basis of my understanding and interpretation and belief of what the Word of God says. And so that then also directs the paths that I make. And then thirdly, yes, absolutely mentors, because mentors are people who then can also help you navigate dynamics in life. And I can tell you with Togomache, there will be discussions about you are a young girl. One of the things, and I'm sure you can have your own versions of this as a woman who's worked in political spaces and in power circles, that when you are young, you are beautiful, you have every male in that circle, as many as you can think, who want not to have a relationship with you, but who just want to have sex with you just like that. Men use sex as a currency and a power to take away your power. You could always tell when a woman has been dealt with, I put it in quotes, dealt with as in when she's now having a sexual relationship with somebody else in parliament, because they cannot even speak and articulate themselves properly, because then men use that currency. And so just knowing how to behave and conduct myself and how to navigate some of those tricky relationships, because sometimes it would be like, I really actually need to engage with this person, but they're approaching me and talking to me about having sex, but I want to talk to them about a change in policy. How do I navigate that? So I got a lot of wisdom from mentors, and that has navigated and helped me through some of those spaces. And sorry to be so direct, but I thought it's explicit enough to help visualize what I mean.
Janah raises an important issue here. Though we often urge young African women to seek leadership and power, we rarely alert them about the vulnerabilities and risks that accompany this journey. Does Janah have a sense of how much she has transformed at this stage? Did she have a sense of her power?
I was bold. If you had asked me this last year, I would have struggled because I've really struggled to embrace Janah as a leader, as a powerful world changer. But yeah, now I can speak about it very openly and confidently. I was bold, Ambassador. I was willing at any given time and moment to say what needed to be said to whoever it needed to be said to. I would say that the discovery that I am one of those people who has the ability and the guts and the frame to take in the ability to confront things that I really judge and think are bad and are willing to say it in anybody's face, no matter who they are, no matter how big they are. The accountant in me could never have known that because that's a very behind the scenes type of work. But the human rights advocate in me discovered that, and that then has remained a consistent characteristic in the stuff that I do.
Janah's well-earned reward for serving with such distinction in Zimbabwe's civil society is a scholarship to undertake a master's degree at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. She graduates with merit and surpasses the dream she thought had escaped her as a high school student in Bulawayo. On completing her studies, Janah transfers her energies to the African continent, focusing on gender and governance issues, taking up a position at the SADC Secretariat as a senior policy advisor, and later as the executive director of the Center of Citizens Participation at the African Union. In view of her work on gender policy, what more does Janah think needs to be done to invigorate the women's movement in Africa today?
What we still, though, haven't still done enough of is to translate, I think, our presence in spaces to unlock tangible benefits for ordinary women. It's because, of course, when you look across the African continent, the poorest person in the most deplorable situation and still the most unempowered person on this continent has a female face. And that is what is still missing. So people like you and I probably should take the brunt of this criticism that I also put on myself to say, how much are we, those of us who are in positions of power, decision-making, and influence, using a framework that starts with a woman and the poorest women in that context being the beneficiary of everything that they do? So a lot more of us have gotten into positions and spaces and enjoyed what it brings to us individually, and not done enough, I think, to unlock for other women. But also, secondly, power is never given, because in a way we're asking and are wanting power. And as women, we don't do a good job of articulating that we actually want power. I want political power. I want economic power. I want social power, because I believe when I have this power, I will use it in this way, and I will use it maybe differently, and so forth and so on. I think we need to be a lot more embracing and naming and owning that that's actually what we want.
Janah's commitment to improving the condition of the most vulnerable women in our societies is placed into sharp focus in her subsequent role as the Pan-African Director of Oxfam. International NGOs are often accused of misreading Africa's priorities and imposing Western values on the continent. How does Janah use her power in this context?
So I will tell you, when I joined Oxfam, I had a lot of friends, colleagues, comrades in activist language who called me a sellout. Because then I was now moving, as you rightly point out, to these, Western organizations. I love Africa, and I see my workspaces as vehicles. My mission to transform Africa so that Africans can live in dignity remains true from the moment I was working in Zimbabwe up to today. How then did I use my own power? I can tell you, when I was at Oxfam, I was the Oxfam Pan-Africa Director, and I was running a continent-wide program where we were working in about 35 countries, and with 5 different programs for our teams, for all my teams. The starting point was, how is this program that you are leading, because I had team leaders, who were managers of programs, who had their own teams. How is your project or your program addressing the rights of African women? Because we started off from articulating who is the neediest person in Africa. And up to today, for me, that model remains. And are my interventions, my programs and investment, are they gonna go and address and meet the needs of this person? And because we have a common denominator across this continent, that face is a Black African female, and mostly who is young, a girl child. That's who our So I actually ended up running the biggest women's rights and gender program at Oxfam, guised as the Pan-Africa program, because all of them, their primary client was this poor African woman. That's who they were seeking to meet her needs. I mean, even in contexts where I'm not working in Africa, because of course now I work globally.
At this second signpost, we learn that women's leadership in Africa is insufficient if it does not translate into tangible benefits for ordinary women and girls on our continent. Janah is currently the Global Deputy Executive Director of Crisis Action, an international organization focused on protecting civilians from armed conflict across the world. The global space presents Janah with new realities.
What I found interesting, though, about global work, that I actually, when I was working in Zimbabwe, particularly across the continent, the issues I had to fight were related to my gender, because you're a woman and looked down upon because you're a woman. However, when I started working globally, I realized I was not only a woman, but I was a Black African female.
With this realization in mind, what kind of leadership style does Janah implement?
By occupying. Am I not a deputy CEO of an international organization that's working around the world? As this Black African female who's then bringing into that leadership the perspectives and the approaches that are informed by my Blackness, my femaleness, and my Africanness. That's been very crucial for me in my leadership. Countering even, right now I can give you, and these are conversations even internally to my organizations we had since the Ukraine war, right? Where in global conversations, in general, the Western stance say to Russia, while of course I accept that everything that Russia's invasion to Ukraine was absolutely wrong, however, as an African person, Russia is not automatically an enemy. Russia was an ally to us in our struggle for independence. So my disposition towards Russia is not automatically, I hate you, you're horrible. No. If anything, actually, some of these Western countries are the ones who did the abhorrible things in my country and in my region. The way we then talked about that conflict brought a lot of aggravation. And I had a lot of my colleagues in the West having to learn to acknowledge that we all don't see the world the same way. So it's been interesting to bring that discourse into spaces. And I'm really proud personally of our organization, of course, because we've built a culture where we can have these conversations and allow, these uncomfortable shifts in understanding amongst colleagues around the world. And so I like to think that I am part of an important cohort of Black African females championing transformation and change, so that perfume is cascading actually in these organizations, but also with the partners in the spaces that we engage in our work.
Janah provides further insights regarding her work at Crisis Action within the context of conflicts in Africa.
So at the moment, my work is focused on protection of civilians. At Crisis Action, we bring together coalitions of different actors and stakeholders, depending on the situation, to work together and leverage the power of working together with others to achieve a specific change in a specific conflict situation. So for instance, right now we're working on Sudan, we're working on the Sahel. It requires this tenacity and this thirst for making a change and an impact for ordinary people, which is something I've always cared about. And in conflict situations, to be honest with you, the people who are most affected by conflict always are the women, children, elderly people, the vulnerable, the disabled people. And that's who we consider ourselves to work for.
Does this work appeal to Janah's values?
Not just my values, but a sense of what my purpose is.
What is your purpose?
For me, I have arrived at understanding it as helping people understand how can they use what they have to transform their situations so that they can have what they want to have and what is possible. I see it true for the people of Africa, which I think is my place of calling, and for people in the global south or people who have been disenfranchised of their rights. I don't consider myself to be doing a job. I feel like I'm being paid to do what I would do anyway, whether I was paid to do it or not.
Janah's enduring strength in her leadership are her high standards of diligence and her drive for excellence. But what are her weaknesses?
So while I have all these strengths and abilities, I think the biggest thing I've had to work on for me, Ambassador, is a lack of empathy. I get so focused on the task and the results that we want to achieve. I don't care who I bulldoze. I've tended not to care who I bulldoze along the way, whose feelings I hurt. I'm all about efficiency. I'm all about effectiveness. I'm all about results. I'm all about black and white. There are no grays. Did you do it? Did you not do it? So in a way, a lot of people found me extremely hard, while inspired and impressed, but really hard, which also then made working with me extremely hard. And so it's something that I kid you not, up to today, I continue to work on. So it's been an area of growth. I realized, in the course of my career, people that I probably had not intending to do so in the way I handled them or responded to them or spoke to them. It's a burden that you carry, but once you are aware, you have a significant responsibility to work at it and find ways to make sure that people understand you according to how you want to be understood.
From her days as a young accountant, Janah has evolved as a person and as a leader. Through a career spanning national, continental, and global roles. What does she aspire to do next?
For the longest time, I wanted to have the two jobs you had. However, last year I had the opportunity to spend time at Yale as a Yale World Fellow. And it was an opportunity to reflect on my next big thing. And I went there convinced that I have to work hard at how I can now reinsert myself into Zimbabwean politics, because that's what I had thought was my eventual trajectory. Your highest honor in life is to serve your country, serve your people, blah, blah, blah. However, with time, though, I've also recognized that my people actually are not just Zimbabwe, but really they are Africans. So I'm really clear that my calling is connected to Africa and being African and Africans. And in that process, I started weeding out stuff and really am convinced that my next big thing, which I hope to be doing in the next year or two, is to set up a humanitarian agency that focuses on humanitarian aid and humanitarian diplomacy. So, an agency that's African, funded by Africans, focused on Africa, led by Africa and Africans for Africa. That's my next big thing.
Casting her view back to the beginning of her journey and to the person she has become, what would Janah say about power and leadership? What is her power mantra?
I do say to a lot of people, especially having worked across different sectors and different levels and now globally, and also having worked conscious that I came in as an other who was undermined many times. I've learned that no one can argue with the quality of your work. They may not like you, they may look down upon you, but the quality of your delivery and content will speak for you. And so the challenge for me out of that is then always to also be excellent. And I think in many instances that made me notable. If it was an intervention in a meeting, I'm making sure that I'm putting in a statement that will actually change the course of the meeting, because it's such a qualitative statement and everybody starts saying, as Janah said. If it's a report that I've written, I've really done my part, my research, my homework to make sure that even if people think they wanted to despise me, they can't argue with what is in it. So apply yourself, but also trust yourself. Embrace your power and walk in it.
It has been a delight to converse with Janah. We appreciate her candor, the vibrancy of her character, and the incisiveness of her mind. Janah's voyage of self-transformation tells us that early setbacks in life are not fatal, but can provide the fuel for success if accompanied by a strong sense of purpose and determination. Janah's purpose is to reach the most vulnerable amongst us. She reminds us that in Africa and beyond, no woman or girl must be left behind in the throes of poverty and despair. Janah boldly walks the talk. We are grateful to Janah Ncube for sharing her leadership story with us, and we wish her well as she continues her journey. We also thank you most sincerely for listening and look forward to your company on our next episode. This is the Power Panel Podcast.